Our next speaker, John LaForge. He's the co-director of NUKEWATCH, a nuclear watchdog and environmental justice group in Wisconsin. And that's from Luck, Wisconsin. And if you've been to Luck, Wisconsin before, you see the sign when you come into town. You're in luck, you're in luck. So, cute sign. Anyway, he edits a quarterly newsletter, and he's a co-editor with Adrian Peterson of Nuclear Heartland Revised, a guide to the 450 land-based missiles of the United States. He's an advocate of nonviolent direct action. He's a regular contributor to Counterpunch and Peace Voice, where he writes on nuclear weapons, nuclear power, militarism, nonviolent resistance. He's also a co-recipient of the 2004 Social Courage Award of the U.S. Peace and Justice Studies Association and the 1986 War Resisters League Peace Award. So please check out nukewatch.org when you get a chance, but please give a warm welcome to our speaker, John LaForge.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for everybody for coming out tonight. A nice Friday evening in the autumn when you've got a lot of chores to do and other things you might be spending your time with. Get to listen to a bunch of mostly older white guys and colleagues. As Bill said, I've been working with NUKEWATCH. This year it's 30 years, my 30th anniversary with NUKEWATCH. I brought a bundle of the latest quarterly that just got printed on Monday. It's hot off the press. If you'd like to get it in the mail, please sign up on the sign-up sheet next to it. I'd like to tell groups with Veterans for Peace that I was made an honorary member about 15 years ago. Having not been in the military, I had to make a sort of a special appeal. I said, well, let's see, I spent 4 years, wearing khaki clothes, eating terrible food, taking orders from idiots, and I had a firm release date each time. So maybe I qualify for an honorary membership, and they gave me that. So I feel a brotherhood there, a sisterhood. A longtime friend showed up tonight, my friend Wanda. We took philosophy classes together at Bemidji State, classes from Albert Finsky, if anyone remembers, the late, great Eastern philosophy expert. And we loved his classes, went to classes, anyone that he taught, we were there. One of the principles that we examined in those long hours was the idea that beliefs that are not acted on are worthless. And I guess I took that to heart. So when it came to graduation time, that year, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. This is 1979. That year, Jimmy Carter reinstated draft registration. It was only 4 years after the formal end of the Vietnam War. We sort of lost our temper with that. It was also the year that 3 Mile Island participated in a partial meltdown, dumped 500 million gallons of radioactive water into the Susquehanna River. Those three things compelled me to examine this philosophical idea that unless you act on a belief you have, the belief is pretty much worthless. So we started protesting draft registration immediately at the post office, like a lot of people here did. We started protesting the development and manufacture of nuclear weapons by a company right in St. Paul called Sperry Univac. They were building computers for nuclear-armed submarines, missile guidance computers that were going to direct the missiles from the submarines to their targets in China, Soviet Union. This fine public-spirited corporation came to Bemidji State for a career day, and we interrupted career day by having a die-in. Die-ins were mentioned earlier by Colleen. We had a die-in that day in the public meeting room at Bemidji, and we poured blood all over Spera UNIVAC's materials. Just a simple die-in. But that was our first taste of the criminal justice system, because we were charged with interfering with the use of a public place. And that statute hadn't been charged against anyone before us. It was instituted after the Vietnam War protesters took over Merrill Hall on the University of Minnesota campus. The legislature snapped into action and passed this law that you could be prosecuted for interfering with the use of a public place. Well, I got 6 months in jail for that little offense, and got my first taste of the Beltrami County Jail. And supporters were outside on a regular basis bringing attention to Spera UNIVAC and my measly attempt to interfere with weapons production. The criminal justice system is interesting because it's not fair to impoverished or low-income people in any way. We appealed the conviction because the judge used these decrepit, illegitimate jury instructions that shifted the burden of proof to me when the burden of proof is supposed to remain with the prosecutor. So while I was finishing up my sentence, the appeal was successful and the conviction was vacated. Now this is the experience of Native Americans and African Americans and people of color all around this country. So we got a taste of the real medicine by doing time on a false conviction right away, right from the get-go. Early on in the work I've done against nuclear power and weapons, I ran across a musician named Elmer Moss, and he would say the same thing in his lectures. He would say the three principal enemies of peace that we have to work against are ignorance of war, forgetfulness about war, and number 3, denial about war. And the fact that the U.S. public hasn't experienced bombing for centuries since the Civil War gives us the impression that bombing happens over there, and not here. So war is sort of a afterthought in this country, except for combat veterans who come back. And here we are with Veterans for Peace telling us the same lessons over and over and over again. The enemy isn't the Soviet Union or Russia or China. The enemy is warfare. Someday we're going to get this lesson straight from these guys. My friend Carl Cabot, who was a campus chaplain with the Catholic Church up at Bemidji for a while, he died in August at the age of 88 after committing most of his adult life to condemning and acting against nuclear weapons. He dismissed these international agreements like the Non-Proliferation Treaty or the Intermediate Forces Treaty. He called them numbers treaties. His point was that the accords have, while they limited nuclear weapons, they never fairly condemned or delegitimized them. None of these numbers treaties called thermonuclear weapons the ultimate evil, as Justice Weiramatry did in 1996 in the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. None of the treaties stigmatized the bomb as contraband or inhumane, unlawful, or criminal. None of them until the 2017 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, which has entered into force in spite of the relentless and blatantly hypocritical objections from the nuclear weapon states. Except for the TPNW, these numbers treaties have always provided legitimacy and legalistic protection to nuclear weapons and even granted a seemingly lofty status to the states that possessed and threatened to use them. Witness the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, the US, China, the UK, Russia, and France. All of them maintain nuclear weapons systems and routinely declare their continuous readiness to attack with them. They call this very real terrorism deterrence, as we know. Last month, as they did in 2015, these nuclear weapon states prevented agreement on a final document by the Review Conference of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which concluded in August in New York. Cesar Romeo, writing for Project Plowshare, said that there was a cloud of discontent and frustration that descended upon the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference as it neared its end. Several non-nuclear weapon states protested that their proposals were largely ignored, while most concerns of nuclear weapon states were accommodated. While nuclear weapon states and their allies continue to frame nuclear weapons as a supreme security guarantee, the rest of the world considers them the primary threat to security and stability. At the end of the month-long conference, Ray Atchison with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom justifiably lambasted the nuclear weapon states' obstruction of the final declaration, writing, quote, "All the nuclear armed states approach nuclear disarmament as something that will hurt them. But for the non-nuclear armed states, nuclear disarmament is one of the best ways to help increase global security. And it's the only thing that will prevent the use of nuclear weapons and the vast expenditure on modernization and end the risks of nuclear war." It's Ray Atchison. I highly recommend her new book. You'll love the title. It's called Abolishing Nuclear Weapons and Smashing the Patriarchy. I was lucky enough to attend the first week of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in New York, mostly out of interest in how the nuclear sharing countries would be dealt with during this meeting. Nuclear sharing is the very unique practice by the United States of stationing its nuclear weapons. The model down here below is what is spread all over Europe. In Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Turkey. The U.S. has about 20 of these B-61 bombs at 6 bases, 2 in Italy and 1 each in the other states. They're called forward deployed, the better to threaten Russia. In Germany, preparations are routine, and what the preparations are rehearsals for attacks with these hydrogen bombs. And the reason we know this is that newspapers in Germany and elsewhere regularly report on these practice or exercises. Headlines read, "NATO holds secret nuclear war exercises in Germany." Some secret. Or German Air Force training for nuclear war as part of NATO. Or NATO nuclear weapons exercise steadfast noon in Buchel. Buchel is the name of the German Air Force base where 20 of these 170 kiloton nuclear weapons are deployed. The U.S. 702nd Munitions Support Squadron, or MUNS, maintains these 20 bombs and helps load them onto the German Air Force's Tornado jet fighters in the event the president orders that they be used against Russia. These Tornado jet fighters use weighted replicas of these bombs in their routine practices. you hear over and over again about the Ukraine war, that it was unprovoked. But NATO and NATO states conducted 95 war exercises in 2021 alone. Those are directed only at the former Soviet Union, the Russian oligarchs at the moment. And these 100 or 120 nuclear bombs, they're gravity bombs. They're just dropped out of the plane. They're not missiles or smart in any way. These exercises are quite alarming and threatening to people of Russia, of course. While we were attending the meetings, we wanted to know if nuclear sharing would be brought up at all, because the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons has 6 or 8 articles. The first article says you're not to transfer your nuclear weapons to other countries. The second article says you're not supposed to receive nuclear weapons from another country. So nuclear sharing is a blatant, overt violation of this treaty, 1970, that both Germany and the United States are obligated to obey. So we keep thinking, well, my gosh, some country is going to say something about this at this meeting. And the only country to do so was China. And they boldly said from the main podium in front of the General Assembly that nuclear sharing by the U.S., those NATO countries, is a violation of Articles 1 and 2 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Well, 2 days later, Germany, through their ambassador Thomas Gummel, took the very unusual step of issuing a written response to China that was, you can get it on the United Nations website, explaining that this blatant violation is legal because these nuclear weapons that are forward deployed are part of a policy that was in place long before the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty was adopted. Does that make sense to any of you? Like the speed limit today is 55. 15 years ago it was 70, so we could argue we can still go 70. A slave trader could say, I can keep these people in chains because I bought them before the Civil War. That's what Germany actually said. And that's what they've been saying for 35 years too. So we take these B-61s very seriously. We take the treaty very seriously, and we've been practicing go-in actions at this Bushel Air Force Base for many years now, and thinking, well, here's the idea. There's only 20 bombs left in Germany. There used to be 7,000 U.S. nuclear weapons in Germany. Why did they maintain 20? Because it's a status symbol. It's a political bit of terrorism that is used to convince people that nuclear weapons have a usefulness. They also have this other function. When you use conventional weapons to obliterate cities in Afghanistan or Iraq or Somalia or Libya, if you use conventional weapons, well, then you can say that was moderate and measured and reasonable because it wasn't an indiscriminate weapon of mass destruction. It wasn't a nuclear weapon. We've taken these go-in actions to the point where the Green Party representative in the Bundestag complained once. We had 18 people go into the base through 5 holes we clipped in the fence in 2018 on a Sunday morning, broad daylight, 11 in the morning. There were no guards anywhere. 18 people, 1 woman in a wheelchair, another guy in crutches because he had a broken leg. We all got onto the base. The woman in the Bundestag said, what is the Bushel base, an amusement park? So we made a point of how insecure these weapons are practically by pointing out that there's no guards at the fence, and we clipped through this chain link fence surrounding this nuclear weapons base with little pliers that cost 12 euros a piece. We did these actions over and over again now, and so some of the charges have been catching up with us. I just got sentenced, you'll be glad to know, to 50 days in a German jail beginning January 10th. So I'll be back in Germany comparing the German system to our U.S. county jails. The argument we've made is that going onto the base and trying to interfere with the planning and preparation of a criminal act, that is massacres with nuclear weapons, is itself a violation of the law. We know this from treaties that were adopted. The Nuremberg Charter that was imposed on Germany after World War II states, this was language written by U.S. prosecutors, that the planning and preparation of a war that would violate another treaty is itself a crime before the war starts. So we always at court explain to the judge that we're justified in going in by the principle of crime prevention. The Bushel Air Base is a criminal conspiracy to commit massacres with nuclear weapons, and we're simply interfering with that crime. Everyone knows that crime prevention is legitimate. Everyone knows that a firefighter who breaks down a door to save someone in a burning building isn't charged with trespass or damage to property. Now the German judges have appreciated that argument just about as well as the U.S. judges here have appreciated that argument. We've, in 40 years, over 30 court cases, we've won exactly 2 times. And I like to think of that as a real relief, because I think it was Einstein, wasn't it? He warned us all, if you keep doing the thing that you're doing over and over again and you're getting the same result, nothing ever changes, then you might not be a sane person. So we kept getting convicted over and over and over. We're starting to think, ooh, Einstein says we might be insane, but we had an acquittal here in Minneapolis over depleted uranium, where the judge, Jack Nordby, anybody know the name? He understands international law very deeply, and he questioned us thoroughly about our understanding of it. He let the jury hear everything there is you need to know about how poison weapons are forbidden ever since World War I. The Geneva Gas Protocol forbids the use of poison. And so we explained to the jury that law. We explained to the poisonous of depleted uranium weapons. We showed the jury photographs of the birth abnormalities in the hospitals in southern Iraq. And so our crime prevention defense was successful here in Minneapolis. The other time we won a case was Minneapolis in Wisconsin. It had to do with the antenna system that sends secret messages to Trident ballistic missile submarines called ELF, extremely low frequency. Again, many dozens of protests there, but a few people actually shut the system off by cutting some of the antenna poles down. Our friends Donna and Tom were charged with sabotage and damage to property. Now in Wisconsin, the sabotage statute means, or in order to be convicted, you have to have interfered with the defense of the United States. So we had 3 expert witnesses, one in international law, one in ballistic missile development, and another, a retired submarine commander, who explained that ballistic missile submarines aren't defensive. They can't be defensive in any way. And it was particularly the submarine commander that got to the jury. He said, when the missiles on my subs changed to D5, that's code name for a first strike ballistic missile, he said he retired from the Navy then because that's not why he joined the Navy. And the jury was bowled over by him and the international law expert as well. So the 2 were acquitted of sabotage although they were convicted of damage to property. We have these victories to hold out for ourselves against these recalcitrant judges who pretend that treaty law doesn't oblige the government to disarm. The Non-Proliferation Treaty has Article 6, where the U.S. and Germany both promised to get rid of their nuclear weapons in 1970. So we're going to continue making this argument. My partner, Marion Kupker, has exhausted all the courts in Germany, having been refused by the Constitutional Court there in a similar case to mine, and has appealed now to the European Court of Human Rights. Somebody mentioned Strasbourg earlier. Who mentioned Strasbourg? That's where the European Court hears cases. If you think you've been treated unfairly and have exhausted all your appeals in your European Union country, you can go to Strasbourg and complain. So we're arguing that the courts in Germany refuse to hear our experts, refuse to hear the crime prevention defense, and we need these defenses heard and explained so that we can get rid of the nuclear weapons. We really thought that a measly 20 weapons in Germany, and if Germany would lead the way and demand they be ousted, then the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and Turkey could follow suit easily. I want to mention one thing that Colleen said. We really don't have to rely on Mr. Trump and Mr. Kissinger, because there have been several other prime ministers and presidents who have called for a negotiated settlement in Ukraine. Oscar Arias, who is the president of Costa Rica and now a Peace Prize winner, he's called for an interesting proposal. He said that the NATO countries should offer to withdraw all these B-61s from Europe in exchange for getting Russia to sit down at the negotiating table. And that if there was a successful outcome, then the nuclear weapons could be removed. This is a great proposal. In addition, the president of Austria, the president of Mexico, the prime minister of India, and the president of Egypt have all called for a negotiated settlement to the Ukraine war. And interestingly enough, all four of those countries have refused to join these sanctions against Russia, primarily because of energy resources they buy from the state. So there are some cool heads. They don't prevail against this coalition of 50 NATO countries now that are aligned with the U.S. and supplying arms and intelligence for this war. And we do have a long road to hoe to bring a halt to that with the $50 billion that are going in to supply weapons to this war. It's a function of this gigantic military budget that is so intimidating. It makes true what my dad said on his deathbed. I'll get to that in a minute, but the budget right now that was just proposed is $850 billion, which, do the math, that's $97 million an hour is what the Pentagon and the military is being handed while we scrabble for some donations and sell t-shirts. It's a difficult situation. That's why my dad said 2 days before he left us, he said, the situation is hopeless, but it's not serious. We try to make light of this with dark humor. There's no way around it. There's so much cancer and radiation-related illness from bomb test fallout and regular emissions from nuclear power reactors that nobody escapes it. Let me see, do you mind a show of hands? How many people have experienced cancer or have cancer in their immediate family? this is where we have to take it to heart and take care of one another, because we might not succeed in knocking down the military budget, but we can take care of one another and watch out for one another as the situation gets a little more grim as we go along. There's a lot of high adventure that we can pull out of this movement as well. It is something to make a plan with 5 peace activists and go in to a German military base in the dark of night. There were 5 of us who went at night too. And to get on top of one of these bunkers where no civilians are supposed to be. No soldiers around. It took a while. We got through 5 chain link fences and got on a bunker. This was 2018 also. And still no alarms went off. So one of our party was an astronomer, and he gave us a little astronomy lesson as we looked up at the stars. And we said, well, I guess we have to alert the military that we're here. So we walked in front of the motion cameras, and sure enough, they came around. We scrambled back on top of the bunker before the guards came in, and they came in 2 giant, oversized personnel carriers, and they all scrambled out with their guns, and they were running around the grounds. They weren't looking up. It seemed like a Monty Python skit. We were watching from the top of the bunker while they looked for us. And finally, we unfurled our banner and said, "Yoo-hoo!" And then, okay, come down from there. So we came down, and they herded us out to the entrance where there's a big gate and formal entry requirements and everything. And they had woken up the base commander to come and see us for some reason. And this was 2 in the morning. So the commander eventually did appear, and he got the 5 of us in a circle, and he reminded us how words can't really achieve what we want them to when we're trying to explain the problem with nuclear weapons. I mean, they don't really do it, do they? The commander looked at us and said, "What you did was very dangerous, and it's not supposed to be fun." I mean, we were smirking, you know, we were so pleased with ourselves for getting on the bunker. But that's what I want to leave you with. You know, we can go up against the most horrific machines ever invented by the human race and still have fun. Stick with it, people.
John said he would stick around for some questions and he'd provide answers. So if you want to, we're going to bring a mic down in front here so you can step up and ask your question of John.
There's such a fantastic history in this country of the civil rights movement, where people actually risked their lives, and they did it over and over again. So principally, it's the legacy of the civil rights movement that inspires me to keep at it, especially the practice of violating petty laws to prevent a greater harm.
Now, John, 2 years ago at our Peacestock, we had Andrew Basovich as a speaker, and I asked the question, every time our diplomats and leaders of our country are negotiating or supposedly negotiating, they always say, well, everything's on the table. And I told Andrew, doesn't that include nuclear weapons? And he said, no, it doesn't. But in my mind, it does. It absolutely does. And I was just wondering what you think, John.
What I think of is that Blinken, or the former secretaries, I call them secretaries of hate, when they're threatening to, or drawing a line in the sand or whatever, and they say everything's on the table, that's their code language for nuclear weapons. But you're talking about disarmament negotiations and everything being on the table? Yeah, I'm not sure the U.S. Enters into negotiations thinking that they're going to get rid of any nuclear weapons. It has happened in the past. The START Treaty, the new START Treaty, they did reduce numbers of nuclear weapons. That's a fact. But normally what that amounts to is that the ones that remain are more sophisticated, they're more accurate, more expensive, and so the industrialists who build them and make cost-plus contracts to do so, they end up with all the desserts anyway, and they keep at it. That's why right now, this B6112 model down here, that's in production in the United States after having models 1 through 11 run through their lifespan. Part of this $2 trillion rebuild of the nuclear weapons infrastructure in this country includes $12 billion to make 600 new B-61s to replace the ones that are in Germany and Belgium and Italy now. Instead of taking this perfectly good opportunity to withdraw them permanently, they plan to replace them with a brand new version. Of course, the German public doesn't want that to happen. The most recent public opinion poll in Germany found over 84%, 89 I think, wanted these B-61s removed. But again, nuclear weapons policy isn't really subject to the democratic process, so public opinion is rather unimportant to nuclear weapon states.